Good morning, good afternoon, and in some places, good evening. Welcome to the Asian Bankers Association and LexisNexis webinar on evolving online fraud, insights from the APAC Cybercrime Report. My name is Moreno. I am Deputy Secretary Treasurer of the Asian Bankers Association, and I will moderate this session today. Fortunately, we have 3 experts on this subject, so my participation will be minimal because this webinar will be full of information that right now is very relevant to banks, as daily we are facing this risk. Fraud in Asia Pacific is continuously evolving, and businesses right now can leverage certain experts, certain companies, certain techniques. And LexisNexis is ahead of the curve in this area. For that reason, we wanted to share with ABA members and non-members the latest on these problems that banks are facing daily. So without further ado, I think Tai Vo is your time.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar about the evolving fraud landscape in APAC. I will highlight key fraud trends that we observed from LexisNexis Digital Identity Network last year. And we look ahead of the emerging fraud risk that is linked to AI-enabled scam, also known as deepfake scams. Konstantin and Paul will join me in an engaging panel discussion later that will be moderated by Mick. So after several years of skyrocketing digital fraud, data shows that the rate of attack has slowed down somewhat in some regions. That said, the volume of attacks is still increasing and organizations have become complacent or putting themselves at risk. But the attack rate slowdown we are seeing might be just short-lived. Fraudsters and scammers are likely retrenching against heightened security. We do expect IA-powered or IA-enabled fraud to grow and evolve. We are already detecting some frequent usage in new account origination attempts to defeat less robust document authentication checks, for example. Having a flexible multi-layer fraud prevention strategy will have never been more critical for organizations and can adjust their defenses as needed to meet these ever-changing threats. A brief overview of the agenda. I will highlight key findings from LexisNexis Cybercrime Report, so we leave plenty of time for the panel discussions and questions from the audience. LexisNexis Resolutions is part of RELEX that also operates businesses in 3 other key areas, legal, exhibitions, and publications. We have offices in key locations in APAC with over 400 staff. Today's focus will be on fraud and identity areas, but we also help clients in the area of financial crime compliance and payment efficiency. We have built expertise across the globe over 50 years. We work with 5 out of 10 e-commerce sites, 9 of top 10 banks, over 140 payments related organizations, the top 15 gaming operators, and with the most visited streaming service. We publish the LexisNexis Resolution Cybercrime Report yearly, analyzing transactions and attack patterns from billions of global online transactions. During the 12 months of 2024, we analyzed 104 billion transactions for this report. The data from these transactions form the basis of the LexisNexis Digital Identity Network, a repository of crowdsourced tokenized data from our entire customer base. And using this intelligence, we build reliable, anonymized digital identity of every online user as they interact across location, devices, and digital businesses. We differentiate between human-initiated and automated bot traffic. This intelligence helps our customer better distinguish between whether a transaction is coming from a trusted user or a potential threat. For the purpose of the report, we are using the transaction to analyze patterns and attack patterns, also attack trends across regions and industry. Attacks referenced in this report are based on high-risk transactions as scored by our global customers. So let's look at some of the Key global trends first, and then we move on to APAC. As I mentioned earlier, we analyzed more than 100 billion transactions in the digital identity network for this report, an increase of 13% year on year. What we have found by assessing all this data is that the worldwide shift from desktop to mobile continue to mature. And of those mobile transactions, more than 4 out of 5 are conducted on mobile app versus the traditional browser. We saw double-digit growth in transactions across all 3 primary use cases, new account creation, login, and payment, showing a similar distribution to the previous year's data. The LexisNexis Identity Abuse Index shows the percentage of attacks per day across the entire digital identity network in 2004, including both human-initiated and sophisticated bot attacks. An analysis of attacks over the longer period in the last, let's say, the last 5 years shows often attacks are coming in wave with a plateau preceding the arrival of the next wave. However, fraudsters initially have been on testing this new technical capability with smaller attacks, and we may see IA-driven attacks rate in the next year's data. The average daily attack rate across all regions was around 1.5%, which translates to more than 4 million attacks that we observed in our digital identity network every day last year, which is an astonishing number and at the same time a frightening number of attacks. What is noticeable is the lower attack rate in EMEA, in Europe. Traditionally, EU regulations have a stronger focus on consumer protections. Also, 3D Secure is mandatory in the EU and UK. In APAC, the orange line, the attack rate are trending upwards, and we will cover APAC later on in the session. The overall attack rate by human is 1.5%. Nearly 3/4 of this attack came from mobile devices, a slight increase. It's possible that attack volume may have reached a plateau where any further effort producing a diminishing rate of monetary return through cybercriminal increasing use of AI may move this threshold more in the fraudster favor going forward. No significant changes in attack rate seen across the different channels. Mobile browser based traffic remain a clear leader in risk, followed by desktop browsers. Mobile browsers are generally considered the least secure channel due to their lightweight nature, which limits the amount of digital intelligence available to detect fraud. From a pure volume standpoint, the majority of actual attacks are occurring via the mobile app channel, showing that mobile traffic needs to be more effectively risk assessed. Automated bot volume fell significantly, led by e-commerce after the industry sustained elevated level during the 2 previous years. As overseas travel has picked up in recent years, travelers are shopping more at physical stores, slowing the attack rate on online marketplaces. Attacks on gaming and gambling industry have also come off their peak during the pandemic years, as many companies are encouraging employees to return to office. The focus of bot attacks shifted instead to financial services, where more than 2/3 of all the bots were seen. Globally, financial services bot traffic was up 18%, driven by an increase of 22% in North America specifically. The charts on this page show fraud attempts in digital identity network are classified by our clients. The 4 most prevalent categories were first-party fraud, third-party account takeover, and different types of scams. The threat of first-party fraud is growing globally. Buy now, pay later clients reported more first-party fraud, as did financial institutions in general. During period of high inflation and rising cost of living, have known to motivate consumers to attempt first-party fraud. A number of clients reporting third-party account takeover also grew, although at a much lower pace than first-party fraud. This is particularly noticeable in APAC, where many scams were related to account takeover, as victims were led to reveal their authentication detail through phishing sites, for example. In Asia, a client may classify such a scenario as either a scam or account takeover. Let's look a bit more detail in terms of the three use cases that I mentioned earlier. Transaction volume by use case is calculated using a subset of the total transaction volume. Logs in provide the highest number of transactions in the user journey by far, which also present frequent security risk. But payment and new account creation together accounted for 17 billion online transactions, each of them another opportunity for fraudsters. Transfer refer to internal transfer within the profile, for example, transferring funds from your saving to checking accounts, while payment or external fund transfer or credit card payment. The other categories, accounting for almost 4 billion or 6 billion transactions, include new device registration, digital download, account balances, checks, for example, and loan acceptances. While the attack rate for new account creations has remained stable year over year, this continues to be the highest risk touchpoint in the entire customer lifecycle. The overall attack rate for new account creation was 9.1, or to put that in a different perspective, 1 in 11 new account creations or attacks. Sign up through mobile channels are still significantly more risky than via mobile apps. And after 2 years of significant increases in the login rate, attack rate, the account takeover focused decline in past year, with the login attack rate dropping by 23% back to the level in 2022. This decline was driven by the reductions in the attack rate on both mobile channels, with the desktop attack rate remaining stable. This suggests that prevention measures for mobile channel account takeover have improved over the year. This global trend was not seen in APAC, where the login attack rate actually increased by 21% year on year. And payments, global payment attack continued to increase in the past year, with up by 14% after a similar increase in prior year. Password resets still remain a high-risk touchpoint, with 11% attack rate and 70% on desktop browser. So 1 out of 4 password reset on desktop browser are attacks. Cybercriminals use password reset in an attempt to take over accounts, for example. And last year, we saw another significant increase in the attack rate for detailed changes events. The volume grew by 92% year over year. So these attacks facilitate interceptions of authentication messages, such as one-time PIN, by changing the account registered phone number and email addresses. Ad listing allow fraudsters to control the sales of promotion of goods and services, provide a way of monetizing stolen goods, or create phony review to facilitate sales, for example. Transfer, as I mentioned before, move money into different accounts within the customer overall profile, an action that can precede a fraudulent payment event. The other category encompasses several other high-risk touchpoints, such as new channel registration, standing order mandates, and changes in beneficiary. This is an example of how a proper fraud defense look like. Banks that have optimized their anti-fraud practices are in much better positions to help protect the customers from becoming victims of scams, including authorized payment fraud, such as money mule, investment scams, and romance scams. This timeline shows how strong fraud prevention algorithm can help prevent unauthorized push payment fraud. At first, the scams target accounts show a regular login and payment behavior. On 9th of September last year, 3 unusual attempts to send a large credit card payment to a wallet at a crypto exchange were blocked. On 16th September in the same year, basically 1 week later, the scammer convinced the victim to try making smaller deposits to a second exchange. These 2 were also blocked. Because this bank is using holistic fraud prevention detection technology across multiple channels, this activity is correctly identified and probable authorized payment scam, and the payment attempts were blocked. At the same time, the bank does not prevent the customer normal transactions with legitimate parties. So this example highlights how fraudsters can engage their victims multiple times to attempt to test the bank's protective mechanism. All right, let's delve a bit deeper into the APAC trends. So in APAC, the digital world continues to evolve rapidly, and different countries are facing different challenges. Japan is seeing increase in digital fraud, reporting record losses in both third-party account takeover and authorized push payment fraud. Hong Kong reported the highest fraud losses per capita last year, and Singapore also reported record cases and losses. And data shows a shift from third-party fraud to authorized push payment fraud. Overall attack rates in Australia are lower than the global average, but it have been rising over the past 3 years. An increase in card not present fraud indicates a shift towards more traditional channels in response to heightened focus on authorized scams and bots. We also observed that regulators are catching up. Australia recently passed a cross-industry scam prevention legislative framework covering telco, banking, and digital platform with fine up to 50 million Australian dollars for non-compliance. Singapore Shared Responsibility Framework determined responsibility for scam losses involving banks, telco company, and payment service provider, but it only covers third-party fraud. And Malaysia requires banks to implement behavioral biometrics as a layer of fraud detection. Fraud classification may vary between regions and industry due to the combination of local characteristics, but also nuanced differences in the definition and interpretations of fraud types. The APAC diagram does not tell the whole story. In APAC, we often use the term fraud and scam interchangeably. Let's use impersonation scam as an example. A scammer impersonates, for instance, a police officer and obtains personal details of the victim. The scammer then uses those credentials to take over the account. In APAC, we often call this a scam, but in Europe and US, the term scam is only used in the context of authorized payment fraud. The rapid expansion of so-called scam centers in APAC in recent years is reflected in the significant growth of human-initiated attack volume in the region. Cybercriminals lure unsuspecting job seekers with fake job advertisement to certain parts of Southeast Asia. Through coercion and threats, these individuals are forced to work as scammers to target other victims around the globe. Social media remain key distribution channel of malicious content, phishing, and advertisement for fake investment. The financial services sector, in particular, banks and crypto exchanges, remain prime target of cyber criminals. Funds obtained from online fraud and scam use money mules embedded in this institution to funnel illicit funds to cyber criminals. This illustration shows fraud linked by digital identities connected to organizations operating in APAC last year. Each arrow illustrates digital identity associated with confirmed fraud attempts at one organization and then crossing over to another organization within our digital identity network. A thicker line denotes a higher volume of attacks. Legislative changes like the Scam Prevention Framework in Australia compel banks, telco, and social media companies to introduce scam prevention measures. However, despite recent successes reported by banks, scam activity remains a topic of significant concern. The increase in human-initiated attacks and overall attack rate on banks in the context of flat transaction volume and decline in automated attacks suggest that measures to tackle scam may not be as effective as hoped, highlighting the need for more complex layered prevention approaches. As in the rest of APAC, mobile traffic is prevalent in Australia. However, the majority of the market is reflected in the narrow split between desktop and mobile transaction volume. While the overall attack rate lower than the global average, these have been rising over the past 3 years. Japan has been slow in the adoption of the digital economy, but concurrently, Japanese companies are expanding overseas at a faster pace. Fraud rates have been trending upwards in Japan in recent years. Last year, Japan reported record fraud losses from related scam, investment, and romance scam. These scams are usually linked to human-initiated attack, which grew 77% year over year. Historically, location and language barrier meant that organizations were were typically less targeted by fraudsters outside Japan. Orasaki, which loosely translates to "it's me" in Japanese, is a common scam in Japan, targeting older generations. Fraudsters impersonate relatives to scam victims. In fact, some prefectures in Japan ban the elderly from using the phone while performing a transaction at an ATM. Consumers in Hong Kong and by extension Greater China area have fully embraced mobile channels, in particular digital wallet and online services that are provided by some of the world's largest companies based in China. Consistent with trends in many parts of APAC, fraud losses linked to investment scams have remained at the top. Hong Kong Monetary Authority have released a series of regulatory updates to combat scams in recent years, but fraud losses continue to grow. Hong Kong, in a way, has a two-track financial services industry. Large foreign and virtual banks have been proactive in implementing fraud prevention measures. Smaller banks that predominantly focus on the domestic market have been much lower in the adoption of real-time fraud solutions. As an open economy with an affluent consumer base and home to some of the world's largest e-commerce company and regional headquarters of global banks, Singapore remained a key target for cybercriminals. Reported fraud incidents and losses reached record high last year, with crypto investment and job scams at the top. There is a noticeable shift to authorized payment fraud that is linked to human in nature attacks. In fact, last year, 82% of reported fraud cases in Singapore were linked to self-affected activities. As we have observed from data from LexisNexis Digital Identity Network and recent news reports, fraud is not only increasing in APAC, but the landscape has also evolved significantly in recent years. In media reports, we often read about third-party frauds such as account takeover and impersonation scams. These incidents affect the victims and organizations, and regaining access to your accounts is a long and often frustrating process. When we shift the focus, however, to the financial impact to the victim, the picture is quite different. Sophisticated scams, including investment romance scams and deepfake scams, have the highest financial impact to the victim. As technology advances, scammers are leveraging these tools to scam victims. With the advancement of deepfake technology, some AI-generated contents are practically indistinguishable to the naked eye. In the example on the left hand side, the deepfake was easy to spot thanks to low-quality image and the pixelations. But in recent years, the quality of deepfakes have improved significantly, as shown in the example on the right. Deepfake identity document can simulate wear and tear, security features, and tricking liveness tests during the onboarding process, and so on. We observe, as of May this year, that 68% of attempted fraud involving digitally generated or manipulated identity in onboarding touchpoints. Liveness attacks are evolving, with real-time overlay and hijacking now the most common techniques. And document fraud is also accelerating, fueled by cybercrime as a service that make it fast and cheaper to execute. And organizations are already rethinking and retooling if their current technology can cope with evolving threats in online fraud. The most well-known and well-documented deepfake scams involve a Hong Kong branch of a multinational company. Scammers use deepfake video calls to convince the CFO of that company to transfer $25 million into fraudulent account. And this happened recently in 2024. Detecting authorized payment fraud requires a comprehensive multi-layer approach, bringing together data analytics and a broad understanding of the evolving scam landscape. Successful results often involve connecting money flows analysis to digital intelligence to enable richer and multi-dimensional data analysis, using AI to optimize detection model that can extract multiple fraud and mute signatures out of the same data set, and expanding data intelligence beyond a single organization. And lastly, using AI to combat AI threats, basically using AI to detect deepfake scam, for example. How well a model works depends on a number of factors, including organization ability to review alerts and their ability to fully leverage all available data. Customer education is also a key, and an organization can introduce targeted messaging that discusses scam scenario. While technology can go a long way to helping to detect scam, it's just one part of the community approach where businesses and law enforcement work together with the general public to succeed. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I will hand it back to Mick for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Tai Vo. I think the report is full of very heavy numbers that any IT department can work on for a long time. Now, I would like to bring the other two panelists into the conversation. Here we have Paul from IDVerse and Konstantin also from LexisNexis. I think after having such a extensive report on the research of LexisNexis and you guys who have been working on the field on this subject, I think you're free to start the conversation on the points that you consider more important for banks. So please go ahead. I don't know if Paul wants to say something because we were having a conversation about this subject earlier.
Yeah, and it's something thanks for that. It is something I've obviously just returned from Hong Kong presenting on a very similar topic on as well. So I think the changing nature of that evolving threat landscape has significantly changed. With the increase in the improvements in generative AI, people have got access to both create fraudulent documents and fraudulent videos at very low cost, and it's simple and easy, and it's not hidden away on the dark web anymore. So it's talking about it's easily accessible. You don't have to wait and delay. They can create large amounts of identity documents. And we're seeing a kind of a common theme is they're using either kind of stolen data to create a document, a fake document, which is a fraudulent document. So if I then go and present it, because they've understood technologies now are needing, show me an image of a government issued identity document, show me that you've got a live person to go, right, I've got a legal identity and I've got a real person in society. So they've moved more from the videos to then going creating deep fake documents because they don't need to create a deep fake video. So I can create a document in real time with someone's real information, put someone else's photo on it. Therefore, if we're only relying on data checks and not actually checking the authenticity of that document in that first step, we've kind of broken the chain. So we've really got to kind of consider all of those new threat attacks in how people are onboarding, especially for the banking perspective, is like, can we stop those fraudsters straight up in order to prevent them getting into the ecosystem, number one? So we've really got to see that. And we've seen that big change. And about in last year, we were probably about 35% of all of our fraud on our network was digitally generated or deepfakes. This year, we're up to 68%. That's a significant jump, just because, as we've kind of already stated, it's that low cost, it's almost cybercrime as a service or fraud as a service. These sites are a dime a dozen. You can find them on the internet, so it's not hidden away on the dark web. We even had a researcher out of Eastern Europe who created his own passport using ChatGPT in 5 minutes, and it passed banking because fake document, real information, and I've got liveness. So if we're not thinking about how they're actually trying to combat that, we're going to be really caught short from a financial services because then the fraudsters are in.
All right. Paul, just running. Of course, AI. You mentioned about AI. It has a basically a dual nature in a way. So it has a transformative potential that can help advance society, for example, in science, fraud detection, and other area. But it also has a harmful side. So cybercriminal can utilize the same technology to scam unsuspecting victims, as you highlighted, and deploy bots to test stolen credentials. How do you see these dynamics play out in the next couple of years? And which side will come out on top in the fight against online fraud?
I definitely hope we all come out on top, number one. But I think you've got a very good point. The cyber criminals have got these tools which are readily accessible. They're low cost. They don't have to worry about implementation timeframes. They don't have to worry about governance frameworks. They don't have to worry about regulations to actually then get and use. So they're already at the kind of the bleeding edge of using these cutting technologies. So number one, I think it is around raising the awareness about what potential risks are out there. And I think it's happening, I think, in pockets. And I think kind of webinars like this is really important to kind of drive this awareness about how can we work together to raise the awareness whilst we think about what technology solutions can fit. So the technology's out there to fix and resolve some of these problems, but how quickly can we get it in? Like if we look what's going on, it took us months and months to kind of get through from one of the large banks to get through HKMA approval, for instance. So all of that time we're waiting, and the fraudsters are like, well, I've got these access to these tools. I can go and start creating fake accounts. Or if we started creating deepfake documents or deepfake videos to even do scams. And then, so we started that social engineering to get to the phishing attack, which is what happened in Hong Kong. Then they obviously got and used deepfake videos to then falsify that person. So I think having that awareness and raising that, because some of these are obviously, they are authorizing these payments to go out, unfortunately, because they are being deceived up in the first place, and they're being deceived because of the quality. So if we can make sure there's awareness whilst we try and fix some of the problems with technology, I think that has to go hand in hand.
Okay. And Konstantin, yeah, we talk about a lot about APAC. Australia seems to have lower fraud attack rates. Can you elaborate a bit more in terms of how that dynamic is happening in Australia?
I think it is also part of the broader question why we are seeing different or higher levels of attack in APAC compared perhaps to other regions. And one thing that I want to highlight is that our region is very diverse, with various economies also geographically very large. And there are multiple factors that contribute to this. Some of them are economic factors, some of them are geographical factors, and also legislation. I think part of what we're seeing in Australia, where we're still seeing relatively low attack rates compared with the rest of the region, but still growing, and this is a separate topic of a conversation, is the legislative framework in Australia. It has advanced quite seriously in recent years with the introduction of the mandatory industry scam codes. They cover telco, social media, and banking. So we are not only addressing where the problem is more visible at the point of moving funds, but also the proliferation and effectively the inception, which often happens, for example, on social media. I saw a question in the from the audience around this topic. And again, having these concerted efforts over the last few years that are also government-backed has contributed to Australia perhaps looking a little different. And again, there are the economical factors when we look at Australia's economy and society that perhaps more similar to the UK and other European countries, yet quite different from North America, where we see different types of identity fraud. In Australia, just like in the rest of the region, we don't have a mandate for strong authentication when we make payments or when we make online payments. So perhaps that's another reason that we see an increase in CMP fraud other than moving channels. And then if we compare, for example, to places like Europe, where you have the PSD, the Payment Services Directive, again, legislation has the opposite effect or the lack thereof. So there are some considerations that could perhaps explain what we're seeing in Australia.
And do you think eventually Australia also move towards the UK model with 50% liability sharing? Because if you look at, for example, in the rest of APAC, Singapore has a framework in place. Thailand is considering the one, but it's for unauthorized fraud, not authorized payment fraud. UK has authorized payment fraud that include all types of scams. Do you think Australia will move towards that model as well?
Look, I am unable to say because I don't have the ability to foresee the future. But from my point of view, it is not very likely to happen, or not very likely to happen very soon. One important thing to remember is that the Australian model is not based on reimbursement. It is based on essentially looking for non-compliance in the institutions that are affected. Again, nothing is impossible, but I don't really see Australia moving to a compensation or mandatory compensation-based model similar to the UK in the near future.
Yeah. Okay. Paul, you mentioned that you have traveled quite extensively within the region. Why does APAC is such a lucrative region for cyber criminals, in your view?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, Ty. I think it's, when we kind of talked to kind of recently, I think it's a combination of both the kind of the structural and economic and almost behavioral factors. So if we think about kind of Hong Kong is obviously one of the largest kind of financial hubs, also some of the other kind of Singapore, fraudsters are obviously drawn to market where obviously transaction sizes are going to be large. So the average loss per victim in Asia is particularly high. It's a lot higher than where they are in the rest of the world. So they can get for each of those frauds is a higher level. The fraudsters are almost kind of regional agnostic. They are going to go where they got high vulnerability with a high concentration. We're also got to think, especially through the APAC region, the population is highly connected. So there's widespread use of mobile apps, wallets, online services, which then creates a broad attack surface for scammers to exploit everything from kind of fake e-commerce platforms to deepfake enabled kind of impersonations. So I think that's almost starting to see having that perspective. Also, cross-border exposure, especially with how Hong Kong is integration with kind of mainland China. It's obviously prime target for that cross-jurisdictional fraud scams and fraud schemes themselves and the fraud rings. So fraudsters are going to exploit those kind of specific gaps, whether they be investment scams or those cross-border mule kind of style accounts. Then we kind of think about the kind of the culture and the social kind of component. Obviously, there's a huge force towards people obviously trusting. There's a high load of trust in people. And what is officially sounding communications or kind of branded platforms, there is a high value of trust, whereas maybe in Australia and other places that it isn't probably as well trusted. So those social engineering tactics of how they're using those deepfakes work well in those environments. Also, they're very fast paced. So people are working through and very busy and highly connected in a very high moving. So they don't obviously then see some of these telltale signs of these characteristics of these frauds. So I think having that is a kind of a really a nice target for the fraudsters. And I think that and how quickly the sophistication, so you're involving fraud techniques are kind of outpacing the defenses. So the technology is moving so quickly, the technology to detect and stop it isn't as moving as quickly. So the fraudsters are currently ahead of the curve.
Okay. Mig, are there any questions from the audience?
I was thinking something here that you guys are on the other side of the fence, and I'm here with the banks. From your side, what you would like banks to pay attention first? Because there are two issues here. One is the prevention, and one is once the transaction is done, how we can slow down the transaction or prevent the transaction from executing. What do you recommend banks to do as a first step as the market evolves?
Yeah, let me take it the question and pass on to Paul and Konstantin. So I think even before we consider a transaction, I think it's good to understand that fraud prevention is not a one size fits all, because you can see credit card fraud has different risk signals, authorized payment fraud has different risk signals, a fake document, a deepfake scam has a different risk signal. So we work with organizations where we help them to implement multi-layer approach. So you're looking at things like digital intelligence, that's important, but also look at behavior. A fraudster behave differently than a genuine user, but also a genuine user that is under stress, for example, being coerced to actually transfer money, is also behave differently. The other part is where the money is going to. We always looking from a sender perspective. Of course, we protect the victim, but also if the victim is sending money to a scammer that is already known in the digital identity network as a scammer or fraudster, we should prevent that transaction from being executed. So the multi-layer is a multiple aspect to actually look into a transaction rather than just one perspective.
Also, did you have something to say too?
I think to what Tai says, it is important to think where actually the fraud occurs, and maybe the transaction is where with actual transaction, the movement of funds in where we see the fraud for the first time, or it is noticeable, but the fraud occurs a lot earlier. So what we need to pay attention to is cover all entry points, all channels, all products, but also all touch points of the customer. To have an effective prevention strategy. The earlier we start upstream from the transaction, the more chances we have we're going to be detecting even before the transaction has happened, because sometimes when you get to payment, it's already too late. I see a question here that's talking about money mules, and I'll attempt to answer the question while in this context. So the first answer is yes, money mule activity is illegal in Australia. It is reportable under AML/CTF regulations, and yes, money muling is a crime in our legislation, and probably in all legislations that have AML regimes. Now, as an example, also linking back to how we utilize AI and advanced analytical methodologies, and we've been doing this for decades. It really depends on how you define AI. We can, for example, find out or detect mule activity based on the account servicing pattern without or before even the money has moved, which is a good example based on modeling, which is a good example of how we prevent those actions before they have even happened.
Yeah, I think it's almost good to remember that it does take people, process, and technology. So if we're talking around what do we want financial institutions to do, it is a shift in the culture of being able to know that these threat landscapes evolve. So systems have to evolve, processes have to evolve, and that is a continual moving piece. You can't put a fraud system in today and expect in 2 years' time it's still going to be working. There's a mindset shift that these systems have to continually be updated and work towards, which is hard. And then the whole kind of governance process around release cycles, how do we test it? There has to be some change in the way from an internal perspective. Also, you kind of talk around, and we spoke about this recently, around kind of what is the legislators and the regulators trying to do? The regulators are trying to set very risk-based approaches to their regulations, because if they're making sure that all the regulations risk-based and it's technology agnostic, this leaves kind of banks to manage their risks. However, that does kind of leave, well, how effectively and what does good look like in that essence? So there is almost the gray of how much information do you say you need to manage your anti-money and fraud risk? Best of luck, come back later. To providing what governance or at least guidance as to what good looks like. So you don't leave a bank kind of thinking, well, how should I do this? Especially for the smaller ones. So you need to have that kind of working together as always, kind of from a regulatory and a bank, and all banks to be challenging the regulations as well, of going, right, how do we help meet this? So we're not trying to manage a process, but you're actually trying to manage the risk. So it is a really important cultural shift, even in the compliance departments, because those are the people who are going to be saying yes or no to how do we actually make sure. So banks departments say, I know product people would say, yes, give me the products today, but the risk and compliance people say, no, we have to meet these specific requirements. So those two have to kind of work together in tandem, but also change some of their mindsets in the first place.
Okay, guys, I think we have a lot of things to talk, and we only have about 8 minutes left, and there are a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I think we can, all of us, go into the Q&A and pick the ones that we want to develop.
There was one here, which is about, I might just pick on it while I was just having a look at it. The reporting of fraud endangers a bank's reputation. Couldn't agree more. I think it's not so much about public fraud reporting. It's around how do you collaborate and have the right information to share together in almost a consortium. Because obviously, if you have fraud reporting, it can get skewed because obviously fraud moves in patterns. It's not telling you what's actually going on. So having some shift towards a consortium, which is a secure, anonymized intelligence sharing, is almost how those kind of the banks and the organizations and LexisNexis Solutions does have those. So how are those kind of fraud technologies are going to be used to kind of help, which also then talks to some of the behavioral patterns which you kind of look at. So I think it's not so much fraud bank reporting, but more a kind of threat intelligence that can be used to either detect, stop, and prevent these things in the first place. And having public-private intelligence to work together, because HK has obviously got the scam meter apps, which you can go and have a look on, and they've had a huge amount of searches, but almost then working those in tandem, because you have to have a group working together, because we know fraudsters and threat tactics work very collaboratively.
I think here in the association, we also train AML personnel. And we know and we encourage banks to work closely with the regulator and with the FIU and kind of maintain a communication daily, even when they have no reports or something like it's not official. We still want them to maintain that communication. And that will take away a little bit the risk of overexposing yourself to the regulator on one shot.
Yeah. And this is important. This is a really good point, because the purpose of regulatory reporting to the FAU is for the FAU to gather intelligence that then is used to disrupt and prevent activity or criminal activity on large scale. So any report and every report that you make to the regulator, whether that's formal or informal, contributes to that large scale prevention on state level. And you know what we don't see doesn't mean it isn't happening in the background. So it is really important to continue to collaborate with authorities, because again, there is a risk not only to individuals and banks, but to the larger economy. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I see a quite interesting question, Paul, about AI in onboarding.
That's funny. I was just looking at
that. Will AI take over onboarding of customers, and what do you think will fraud and scam increase or reduce?
I think 100% AI is going to have to be used. I think, as I've presented in this whole changing nature, the fraud artifacts, humans just cannot pick them up. To be able to pick a fraudulent document from an image is almost impossible for a human to pick these up. They are so good. The videos are getting better. People are more reliant, and the World Economic Forum did a survey, and actually deepfake faces are more trustworthy than a real face. So if you have a human trying to review a video and they're trusting that face or automatically, it's a problem. So yes, AI will have to take over, which is really important, but to be able to pick the anomalies, because they are so minute, but there are telltale signs which get left behind, which is more than what you just see on the outer layer of an image. You can talk around underneath. So I think, yes, that's really important. It will start to do that. There are methods we can stop them to stop deepfakes, and we've got a couple of solutions. And then it's more around how do we work on that human over the loop governance. So it's around AI governance, which is a real shift to ensure that it's just not a black box. We have to make that more transparent and explainable to be able to then trust it. So I think it'll be a shift in how do we look after and govern, which is then AI is being used in the IDV on the onboarding.
Okay. There are a lot of questions about AI. So one of them is, how can we use AI to prevent fraud, to prevent and detect fraud? I think that's, in short, of course, when you talk about fraud and highlighted before that we actually analyze 104 billion transactions, this cannot be done manually. So the way actually we leverage AI or machine learning specifically is to basically build a risk profile of a digital identity. So when they interact online, there's a IP address connected to it, phone number, email address, account, you name it, geolocations. All these factors will build up that profile of that user. And of course, when that user interact across different industry, different locations, we'll build further intelligence of that digital identity. So that's how we use AI to actually provide that kind of in-depth analysis. Konstantin, maybe you can add from your perspective as well.
I think there are two sides to it. One side is the use of AI techniques by the criminal community, and I keep saying that crime is a balance between reward, opportunity, and risk, and their risk is quite high, but the reward is quite high as well, which also makes our region attractive because there is a high concentration of wealth and a population that's probably relatively unaware of the risks. And on our side, using AI to prevent and detect is our challenge is that we cannot afford to get it wrong, whereas the criminals don't really care. So what we need to make sure is that we apply AI in ways that are sustainable, in ways that are also explainable, because that's also what matters.
Here I have one question. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was browsing the question. I see a question that I would quite like to answer, and that is about prevention of infostealer malware. I think my opinion there is that there are things that we can and there are things that we cannot prevent because they'll keep coming. And perhaps what we should focus on is rather than preventing information to be shared, because I think the humans are probably the weakest link, and we probably should be worried less about infostealers and the people themselves. There was another question talking about how criminals were aware of the financial situation of the victim, and that could have happened, for example, through inadvertent disclosure on social media. So I think the baseline there is, rather than necessarily trying to prevent information to be stolen, which we should continue to do, we should also focus on actually preventing that information to be used, which is something that we can clearly do.
Well, the bottom line is that we don't want the money going out of the account. We have to keep that in mind. Sometimes we put so many barriers into the process, and we are forgetting the bottom line here. Now, I have one question here. It's hard to measure success, but it says, how successful are the present fraud prevention techniques and regulatory framework at reducing risk in rapid payments? How can we measure that?
That's a good question. So, of course, from a regulatory perspective, a lot of what we have seen so far is when regulators are setting up, let's say, portal for you to report, let's say, a phone number, a bank account, or an email address, fraudulent email address, obviously. Of course, these are not real time. So someone needs to actually report that. So you have to go online, report that, and someone review whether that entry is correct. By then, fraudsters have already moved on to other data point, to other victims, for example. So one thing is, of course, real time. The other thing, of course, when you in my presentation highlight is how you leverage data, because not every single because if you look at so many data points, so you need to understand, okay, do I look at a specific fraud, or do I look at a broader perspective? Is there also a credit card payment is very different from a bank transfer or from someone logging into an account. So different aspects will require different data sets.
Good. Any other questions that you see there? We went over the hour, but there are so many questions here. Maybe one or two more?
I might just jump in on the money mules. I think that's one ongoing. It's the bane of our existence in the financial sector, I'd agree, coming from it and then coming on the flip side. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to kind of think about for dealing with kind of money mules. Is how do we stop people who aren't real even before they get in? So how do we stop someone who has either a fake document or a stolen document or a lost document to even getting into the system? If we've got real people into the system, and then they're in the financial system and they sit dormant for a number of times, and then they sit there for 6 months and then they start transacting. How are we thinking about the behavioral transactions, and does there kind of look from that perspective something looks out of the ordinary if something looks out of the ordinary, or they start doing something which seems not in line with kind of normal processing, or it sits as an outlier, maybe that's suddenly a high risk transaction, or it's suddenly they've started transacting a lot. We can then detect that, but also then use and think about how do we use almost then biometric authentication, re-authentication, and go, oh, wait a minute, Paul, we haven't seen you in 6 months, and suddenly you've done six $1,000 cash payments which have come in and out of your account. Can I just check that's you? And have that ongoing piece and going, right, I know I've got Paul into the system in the first place. Can I prove it's really Paul on an ongoing basis? And we can send out a quick, easy mechanism to then validate. So there's different ways that you can then think about the ongoing detection, because we can't just go, right, we'll 100% stop everyone at the front door. We won't. Some people will be in the system. Some people will be valid. Some people might have been paid for an account. But then it's, well, how do we think about using it to detect abnormalities? And I think that's where AI becomes really powerful.
One more question, and then I think Tai Vo should give the closing remarks after this last question.
All right. Let me see. Okay, so the question.
I
See
have
here.
one.
Go ahead.
Is there a fraud method that banks or platforms quietly tolerate because fixing it would cost too much? I really like this question. It's a great question. And I think accepting fraud as cost of doing business should never happen. That's a very short answer. We should make every effort possible to eradicate fraud or reduce it as much as we can and not tolerate it.
Yeah, I think that's very important, especially when we say talking around people working together in an ethical manner. Everyone talks around like the ethical use of AI. Are we okay to, it's a bit hard, I have to go around and invest some money, but I'm okay to live with this. That broader, if we had everyone doing that, that broader impact and the social impact of what actually doesn't get talked about. I know there's just kind of, there's money loss, but I don't think you kind of almost go into, I think the financial toll or on the actual victim is underestimated. And I think that is, you're almost going from an ethical standpoint of how do we almost ensure that anyone is protected. And it's, I think that's a very important point to be pushing.
Well, we finish in an inspiring mode with a moral concern on this issue. So that's good. Now, Tai Vo, what would you like to say now that as we close the session?
I would say, look, so when you actually look at any transaction, of course, nowadays, if we scroll through a social media feed, for example, there's a lot of things that you probably think, wow, that cannot be in real life, right? So anything that you see online, be skeptical. That's one. The other thing, if you are not sure, just pick up the phone, call your friend, call your family, call the bank, for example, rather than click on link, rather than follow the instructions that is provided by someone you don't know. I think be vigilant on what you do and what you share online as well.
With that, thank you very much. See you the next time.
All right, thank you.